Hello, and welcome back to the Cave Escape podcast. I'm Caleb Groves.
And I am Ashton Goolsby.
And this week, we are now pivoting from the book that we've been doing, the liberal arts tradition, and now we're just going to talk about different things every week. And this week, since it's Holy Week, we decided that we were going to talk about St. Matthew's Passion by J.S. Bach. And so,
Johann Sebastian
Bach. I remembered like his first name, but then I couldn't remember his middle name, and I didn't want to just say Johann S. And so Ashton has done research on this for this week, and so I'm going to kind of ask him questions, and we're just going to kind of dialogue about this amazing piece of music for 30 minutes. So, but first, we should talk about who Bach is, give a little bit of background if you want to do that.
Yep. So, Johann Sebastian Bach, he lived from 1685 to 1750. He was German, and he was a composer in what we call the Baroque period. And actually, he's so important to the Baroque period that they end the Baroque period with the date of his death.
Yeah.
Because he was that influential. And he, funnily enough, though, he was not really well known within his own lifetime outside of the little area in Germany that he lived in.
Mm-hmm.
It was not for about 80 years after him. So, it was actually St. Matthew's Passion that kind of brought him back. Felix Mendelssohn loved Bach.
Right.
And so Mendelssohn actually was the one who kind of brought him into a wider light. He led about a performance of Bach's St. Matthew's Passion 80 years or so after Bach had originally performed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody was like, whoa, who is this guy? And they started looking back into him, finding all this stuff about him. But Bach he was an organist primarily, violinist, and he was a composer, but he was also a teacher of music. He was a Lutheran, so this is shortly after the Protestant Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after, way closer
Within
than
a
us,
century.
definitely. Yes. So in this still kind of new Lutheran tradition, and he's composing church music to be performed in the context of worship, and he exclusively performed or wrote music for worship.
Mm-hmm.
He was very passionate. He was very firm in his faith, but also he was very passionate about music, even to the extent of a lot of his students hated him because he was so strict and he was so rigid about their practicing and the things that he had them do. That actually led, I remember we had a couple stories about him in music class. One was actually he was walking out of the church one night after he was closing up, and he and his wife were walking out of the church. And one of his students he'd apparently had some beef with earlier in the day, which was not super uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
And the student attacked him as he's coming out of the church. Little did he know that Bach was always fearing being attacked.
What?
And kept a knife hidden under his garment. When the student attacked him, he put out the knife and stabbed him.
What the heck?
They did get in trouble. That was self-defense.
Oh, my gosh.
But then also in regards to, he was apparently when it came to music, very intense. But his son, Johann Christian Bach, I believe it was who it was, wrote that because his father loved the organ so much, he was so good at it. He said when a new church in the area would get an organ, his father would go to test it out.
Mm.
And so they said when Johann Sebastian comes in the building, pulls all the stops out of the organ, starts playing all the keys, push and pull and stop, just putting it through the works. And they said that Johann Christian said he would stand down with the organ builders and they would just watch them sweat just because they thought he was going to destroy the organ. But he said, little did they know, my father knew more than anyone else in Germany about the organ.
Whoa.
And he knew what the limits of it were, and he knew how far he could push it before he had to pull back again.
That's crazy.
So Bach apparently really knew what he was about.
Yeah.
He was also, we were talking about this before we even recorded. I was talking to somebody else about it earlier today, but he's one of those two. He knew the rules of music and composition so well that he has the ability to break them seemingly whenever he wants,
Mm-hmm.
and he gets these amazing sounds out of it. Even though what he's done is not technically by the rule book correct, he understands it so well he can break the rules and it still works.
Yeah.
Because he just understands what he's doing so well. It's amazing.
So you mentioned that Bach kind of defines the Baroque period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of go into what the Baroque period is and like what defines the music of that era?
So the Baroque period it's coming after the Renaissance. So you've got people in the Renaissance like Thomas Tallis in England. You got people like Palestrina and Allegri who are composing these pieces that are very, very melodic, but it works a lot of polyphony, which is the idea of you've got, it's not just normal harmony. So polyphony literally means many voiced. So it's not just that you've got this harmony like we think of now. We've got soprano, alto, tenor, bass. They would compose this music where each line can work as its own melody in a sense, but they all fit together to form this greater sound. My favorite example is Thomas Tallis's Spem and Allium, which is I believe 40 voices is what it's meant for. But it's this massive. He's got multiple different choirs singing independent lines from each other, and it all works together as one. It's beautiful.
It's crazy.
Were you with us when we got to hear that back in the spring?
I don't think I got to go to that one. I think I was at the other one.
Thomas Tallis is one of those, like, me and Jonathan both said this when we were done. We got in the car. Music was ruined for the next week. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. But so the Baroque's coming out of this recent, I don't want to call it an experiment, but this recent change in music where it's no longer, because for the longest time, the idea of music in the church was seen as it's bad because it had all these pagan affiliations with it.
Right.
And there were no instruments, definitely, because they brought up pagan ideas. When the organ was invented, they said, well, allow this one because it's new. There's no baggage that comes with it, and it's based off of wind, kind of like the human voice works.
Oh, interesting.
So that's part of why that was big in church music. But then they really said before that the point of music is to help us convey words. Its purpose is to convey words. It shouldn't be overly exaggerated or beautiful. So for the longest time, it was merely to convey words. But then, of course, once you get to the Renaissance, they start doing all these crazy things with it to beautify and harmony and the polyphony, all these other things to add to it, along with counterpoint.
Right. So, really quick, when you said like it was mostly to convey words, is that like with chant, like Gregorian chants and stuff? So like they would just be like a reciting tone, and you just like sing this one pitch and sing all the words, and then have a little bit of variation. Is that kind of what that was?
Yeah, it was mainly like a memory technique. So like So like we did at New College with Psalm 1. If I want someone, there's a version of it I know to sing. Like there's one that's oh, greatly blessed is the man who walketh not astray. But there it moves a lot. It's got a melody to it, and the words have been altered slightly to fit the music. They said the words are more important. So something like we might do at New College with, it's one tone all the way with slight variation. So like, happy are they who have not walked in the counsel of the wicked. The point there is to try to preserve the words more.
Right.
So even at the time of Bach, they've kind of left this idea of it doesn't need to just be simple. We can have beautiful music, but the words are still important, and the words and the music need to go together. We need music that reflects what's going on in the words. And that's kind of tying this back into, I mean, this seems like it could be a far cry from, I mean, we've left, we talked for however many weeks it was, I think it was like 9 or 10 weeks about classical education and the trivium and the quadrivium of philosophy, and now we're just jumping off into this. But I mean, this ties back into, in my mind, specifically harmonia, but also cosmology, because you've got this idea, and even the trivium, because you've got the language here, that the words are important, they're thought through carefully, what are we saying, what are we doing with them, but then you've got this innate order of, and the harmony of specifically sound, which you find in harmonia, looking at the music aspect specifically, but looking at there's these relationships of sounds that are innate in creation, and how do we understand how they work together, and how do they help us convey the meanings of these words? And the idea of harmony specifically comes in when you look at something like counterpoint, which I may need you to help me explain a little bit what counterpoint is.
Yeah. Well, so it's counterpoint. I forget exactly why it's a point. But basically you have like a line, which is called cantus firmus. And then you write
which is like your melody, basically.
Yeah. Oh, it's kind of like what's given, and then you write
Mm-hmm.
your counterpoint to it. So it's like an opposing. I think it actually kind of translates to like note against note.
Yeah.
And so there's like the exercises that you do like in music theory and stuff where you write first species and second species, which is different amounts of notes against the cantus firmus. But there's like all these rules that go with it of like you have to have a certain number of consonant, like pleasing intervals, and then there's dissonant intervals that you're not allowed to use except in certain contexts.
This is the idea of relationship.
Right.
You want to have certain relationships. You can have certain ones of this one, but you don't want to focus on one too much. You need
Exactly.
You need to balance out and make sure you have a large selection of them represented and you use them.
Yes. Yeah, like a good counterpoint. Counterpoint is also focused on the line, too.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it is writing a good line, which has like a good shape, generally like a general kind of arc shape, but also not just straight up and straight down. You want to have some variation going up and down. You want to have some dissonant intervals. You don't want to only have consonant intervals. So it's just kind of it's this balancing act of you want it to be a good line, but you also want to make sure you have the right intervals.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to have too many giant jumps from one note to like a way higher note.
Unless it's the bass. The bass is the place where you're allowed to have
but
big
that's actually
jumps.
more in. I mean, you don't really have like a bass part until later, right? Because this is still
That's
just like
true.
polyphony.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's just kind of having right proportions between everything. So a good counterpoint would have good line shape, mostly consonant intervals, not too many perfect intervals, which is a specific subcategory of consonant intervals, and then also still some dissonant intervals.
Yeah. And so Bach was a master of counterpoint.
Yeah.
And we'll see a lot of that as we go through this piece if you listen to it. So but before we really get into, because we're about to go into what is Passion music and then get into his St. Matthew's Passion, the version that I listened to get ready for this, which is also, I usually listen to it on Good Friday, but the version I usually listen to, because obviously Bach was German, so it's in German, there's a version, it's recorded, I can't remember who recorded it, but the conductor is David Wilcox, and you can find it on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music, but that's a version they've done in English. So they've tried to match it, and it's not perfect, but they've tried to match the English translation as close as possible with the original lineup of the German words and the notes and things.
Is that's different than the Leonard Bernstein one?
I think so.
Okay.
I think it is. I think they're two different ones.
I totally just coughed while you were talking.
I mean, I haven't found a bad version of it. I mean, I've listened to selections of others this week, but that one, that's if you're a purist and you want to hear it in German, I mean, more power to you. But I mean,
for sure,
most people, I feel like in America that we're probably talking to don't speak German. So if you would like to hear it where you can understand it and enjoy it, and if you understand what they're saying, it's very powerfully done.
Mm-hmm.
The David Wilcox version, I can recommend. It's very good. I listen to it every year. So I guess before we get into St. Matthew's Passion, we should probably real quick say what Passion music is.
Yes.
So the setting of the Passion refers to Christ's passion, or his leading up to and through his crucifixion, his suffering for our sins. So this was the practice. I didn't write it down, but something I was reading, I believe it was somebody possibly was on a crusade going to Jerusalem, discovered that there were churches there who around the time of Easter, specifically on Good Friday, would go through and recite or kind of chant the Passion narrative. So starting usually with the preparation for the Passover up through the crucifixion. And they brought this back and they thought, well, that's a great idea. And typically they would actually go through St. John's Passion. So the crucifixion account from John, but then it kind of developed they would do other ones. So Bach did actually do, before St. Matthew's Passion, he did a St. John's Passion, which is not as well known. I've listened to part of it. I mean, it's good. I don't think it's nearly as good as St. Matthew's. So sorry.
Is the difference between them just uses the text from John rather than Matthew?
Yes.
Because it's still the same story.
Yeah, same story. It's just which source are they using. So in St. Matthew's Passion, he's actually, they're singing, which we'll get into more specifics in a second, but they're singing the words of the Matthew account.
Right.
So typically the way this was originally done was they would just go through the story, everybody would sing it kind of together. But then as it kind of went, they kind of turned it into a little bit more of a performance
Mm-hmm.
where they would start dividing up the parts and giving different people different characters in the story to sing.
Gotcha.
And they would use, this is usually performed on Good Friday. So Good Friday obviously is the day we remember the Last Supper and then the crucifixion.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Monday, Thursday is when we remember the Last Supper.
Right. Yeah.
And then the next day is Good Friday, and that's when we remember Jesus' betrayal and crucifixion and death. And then there's Holy Saturday, he was in the grave, and then, of course, Easter morning, we remember he rose. So just a precursor with this does not have a happy ending. The St. Matthew's Passion ends with Christ dies, and we are left weeping at his tomb, just crushed by this loss.
Yeah.
Because it's not Easter yet. It's not meant to be completed. It's completed on Easter, but not when this was supposed to be performed. So getting to Bach's St. Matthew's Passion, this was first performed on Good Friday, April 11th, 1727. And the characters that he puts forth in this, there's 4 soloists. There's a soprano, an alto, a tenor, and either a bass or a baritone singer. So the tenor soloist is given the role of the evangelist, who's almost the narrator of the story. Because if you read the St. Matthew account, Matthew's speaking in places. He's telling us the story. Then the bass or the baritone soloist is given the role of Jesus. He sings the lines that Christ would have spoken. And then there's some places where they switch up some other parts in here with the 2 other soloists and amongst each other sometimes. But there's like Pilate, Peter, Judas, the high priest, Pilate's wife is in there. So there's other characters too that have single parts, and then there's a chorus that's singing. And so, one last important character who you might not expect is you. You are a character in it as well.
Interesting.
And even you could say it's you or kind of Bach himself in some places.
Is that like when they're shouting "Crucify him"?
Well,
or
in a bunch of different places actually.
Okay.
Which I'm actually about to jump over to. There's 4 different kind of parts to this. So there's a chorus. There's chorus, recitative, arias, and chorales.
Okay.
So the chorus sections are parts sung by the choir, and then there's a recitative, is like singing the text. So it's a pause kind of to allow for the natural flow of how somebody might speak. So we'll get to one in a second. I'll give an example of it.
Okay. Is that kind of more like the chant kind of thing? Like
yeah, it's more like chant. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And an aria is usually for a single voice. There's actually a couple in here where it's 2 voices singing, which isn't necessarily against the rules. Bach uses these here to set the personal tone of the passion. So there's places in this where we take a break from the story and kind of spend a minute meditating on what part did we play in this? Because it's not just, well, Jesus 2,000 years ago came and suffered and died, and well, those Jews there, they behaved horribly. How sad that was for the people at the time. He came because of our sin too.
Yeah.
And so Bach tries to remind us of that as he goes through. And another way he does that is with the chorales, which are congregational hymns, which he took and he set well-known German hymns in his St. Matthew's Passion, because, of course, the Roman Catholic idea was you come to church and it's in Latin, you are there, you're sanctified by watching the priest go through all this literally hocus pocus up on that's where the term hocus pocus comes from. It's actually the Roman Catholic Mass.
Whoa.
Because they believe that the body of Christ, the bread's changing into the body of Christ.
Right.
And in Latin, it's hoc est corpus meus. This is my body.
No way.
And so it's actually a perversion of that. It's
oh my gosh.
because they don't speak Latin, so they think they're hocus pocus, hocus pocus. That's where that comes from.
That's hilarious. I
you
did
not
know that. I don't know how I didn't know that. I've never heard that before.
You've spent all this time with Mr. Wilbur and don't know that?
We've never talked to him about transubstantiation.
That's fair. But so that was the Roman Catholic idea, was the people were supposed to come in, and they were supposed to watch. And the priests and bishops up front did their stuff, and everybody else was just kind of watching. But with Bach's Lutheran, so he's part of this Reformation movement of the people need to be involved. They need to be involved in what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of why St. Matthew's Passion is in German, not in Latin, so that the people can understand. But he also has times where the people are supposed to sing with the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
So now we do this. We do this today as a performance piece, unfortunately. But ideally, there's 3 parts to it. Part 1 would end, and then there would be a sermon by the preacher.
Oh.
And then they would continue singing. So this is a worship service.
Yeah.
This isn't a performance piece. This is a worship service.
That is so cool.
So there's parts that if you go see it now, they will sing the chorales, but the congregation would have typically sung the chorales in the midst of the service.
Mm.
And the most famous of the chorales, which he uses this hymn 5 times, is what it's become known as the Passion Chorale out of this, but it's O Sacred Head Now Wounded.
Oh.
Which is a great example of Bach's use of counterpoint and the way you've got all the different lines that kind of do their own thing. Because you can sing the melody line, but then the bass, alto, tenor lines function as their own thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Bach's chorales are awesome.
They really are. Some like you've got everybody knows the "Oh Sacred Head Now Wounded," but then you like the bass is "Oh Sacred Head Now Wounded." It's still
cool.
got this kind of melodic flow to it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you listen to this, you'll see Bach is genius at what he does.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things are things to keep in mind as we kind of actually get to his St. Matthew's Passion now.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we can't go through the whole thing. It's a couple hours long.
Yeah.
But there's a couple things I just kind of wanted to hit, just to kind of just show, if you do go listen to it, which I highly recommend, it's amazing, to kind of help understand what is Bach doing in a lot of this. So he opens up with this part. It's sung by the choir, and the words in English are, "Come ye daughters, help me lament." So he's calling you as the audience and everyone in the room to come and lament with him over Christ's death. But then the choir splits. So one side says, "Behold," the other answers, "Whom?" And then the first part again says, "The bridegroom." And then they again say, "Behold him." And the second part answers, "How?" And the first part responds again, "Like a lamb." So you've got this, and it continues, but they're back and forth asking, "Well, what are we doing?" And then the other one responds, and they ask again, "Well, how ought we to do this?" And the other one responds again. So leading you in, informing you, but in this call and response back and forth kind of way.
That's really cool.
And then they kind of get into almost kind of the Agnus Dei, which is the passage, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world.
Mm-hmm.
They draw a lot on that imagery in there.
And which part did you say that was in?
This is the opening.
The opening.
This is how they open it. He calls you in to join with him in this lament.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And they end this whole section. It's a lot. They kind of repeat some of the words over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And they end it with, "Have mercy on us, O Jesus." And they kind of hold this note out. And they've got all these strings and organ and harpsichord kind of playing with them. And they kind of hold us out. And then they stop. And then you get, in some versions, harpsichord or organ or something, kind of gives the note. And then a soloist comes in and sings, "When Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples," which is the tenor, the evangelist singing.
Mm-hmm.
But he's singing it on like one note. It's one of these, it's almost spoken.
Right.
And so it's just him. He just sings his part. And then Jesus comes in with what he says.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "Ye know that in 2 days will be Passover, and the Son of Man is then to be handed over that he may be crucified." But when Jesus sings, all of a sudden, if you listen, the strings are playing very faintly in the background.
Mm.
Bach, every time except one that we'll get to later, he gives Jesus this termed the musical halo. That kind of, when Jesus speaks, there's this shimmering sound behind him as he speaks.
That's cool.
So if you get stuck trying to figure out which one is Jesus, just listen for that faint shimmering sound in the background. That's what he's added in there.
Whoa.
And so then after that, they move on to another chorus offering us a commentary. They say, "Beloved Jesus, what hast thou done wrong, that they have pronounced so hard a sentence? That is thy guilt. Into what sort of misdeeds hast thou fallen?" And so they offer all of this. And then they go into the account of the woman washing his feet. And then the chorus offers more commentary and things on that as we kind of go through. And then all of a sudden it shifts from Jesus over to, of course, not everybody's happy that Jesus is coming to Jerusalem for the Passover. You've got the priests, scribes, elders, and then Caiaphas, the chief priest.
Mm-hmm.
And so the evangelist again tells us that they're seeking to lay hands upon him and slay him. But the evangelist says, "But they said," and then he pauses, and you're expecting maybe one person is going to come in and sing, but instead of one person coming in and singing the response, you get like 3 different people all of a sudden back and forth over each other singing, "Not upon the feast, not upon the feast, not upon the feast." So you've got one comes in, not upon the, not, and another one comes in, not upon the, not upon the. So they all come in over each other. So it's mimicking a large multitude of people chanting and bickering about what to do. So he's getting their disunity and their bickering back and forth about what to do. So they say, not upon the feast, lest from it there be an uproar among the people. And so, but they've created the uproar in Bach's setting.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
So then he comes into Jerusalem. They're having the Last Supper, and when they sit down, and this all happens actually fairly quickly. This part moves quickly. Later on, it does move slower, and Bach offers more commentary, but here he's just telling the story mainly.
Mm-hmm.
So they sit down, and Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." And again, you might think that maybe the evangelist is going to offer us commentary on what happens, but again, we get this. The evangelist says, "And they responded to him," and you get this chorus of 12 different parts. It's like 11 different parts. They go, "Is it I? Lord, is it I? 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 Is it I?" You have these 11 different parts that sing, "Is it I?" And then they stop suddenly, and it says, "And then Judas asked him," and Judas by himself goes, "Lord, is it I?" And then Jesus says, "Verily thou sayest." So you've got these 11 disciples singing beforehand, and then Judas all of a sudden is singled out, and it's just him.
Whoa, that's cool.
So it's one of those you don't necessarily realize it until somebody points it out. But like that's genius that he thought to do that.
Yeah.
So then Judas leaves. He goes out, and then they go to the Mount of Olives, and this is where the congregation is invited to come and sing as well. So they sing, "Know me, my Redeemer, my Shepherd, take to thee. By thee, source of all good things, much good has befallen me. Thy mouth has refreshed me with milk and sweet meats. Thy spirit has favored me with many a heavenly longing." And so the congregation is singing this about Christ and what he's done for them. And then Judas comes in, betrays him, and the whole thing with the cutting off the servant's ear.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus says, "All who take up the sword shall perish by the sword." And then they flee and they leave him. And this is where part 1 ends. And this would typically be where there would be a sermon.
Oh, okay.
But because we do it as a performance piece, we're going to keep moving on, unfortunately.
No sermon on this podcast.
We don't have time for it anyway.
Nope.
So then the next part is his trial. So part 2 is his trial. It moves a lot more slowly. So the most interesting part to me in this, though, was the 2 witnesses are brought forward. You have the first witness comes and sings his account, and then he's almost at the end, he's interrupted by the second witness, who comes in as soon, really technically slightly before his account is done. Second witness comes in, sings an almost identical line to what the first guy sang. And the implication, according to one source, who I later found out was actually Mr. Wilbur, he ended up being a big source on this, and I didn't realize till I'd finished reading stuff that it was all written by him. But a connection he made with this was, it's almost as if, because per the Mosaic law, you needed 2 witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
But the implication here is these two witnesses have been rehearsed. They're singing almost note for note the same story. Not as if, well, I witnessed it and I'm giving my account of it. They were rehearsed before they were brought into the room. Is kind of the implication of this.
That's interesting.
And there's a lot more commentary and things that go on here. And so after the trial, we get to the sentencing and then the crucifixion of Christ. So you've got them, Pilate can't decide what to do. His wife sends a message, says, have nothing to do with this man. I've suffered much in a dream about him for today. And they get to the part where it says it was a custom that he would release to them one prisoner at this time of year. And so most of this is kind of sung almost in the spoken style back and forth. And then they get to the point where he says, who would you rather have me release to you? This Jesus who claims to be the Christ or Barabbas? And so it's very just one person kind of singing, and it's got this beautiful kind of, you got every now and then the underlying organ giving you the note or something. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it almost sounds like they scream it. The choir just sings this very clashing, just Barabbas. They just say Barabbas, and it's this, I'm looking at it now, it's the most janky chord I've ever seen. I don't even know what you would classify this chord as. But it's a horrible chord, and it's loud. So all these voices come in shouting this obnoxious chord. And the idea is supposed to be just how horrid it was that they betrayed him and just the evil that's going on here. So then they have the part where they lead Jesus out. They force Simon to bear his cross. And here Bach adds another area for the bass soloist to sing. He says, come, sweet cross, I will say then, my Jesus, give it always to me. Should my pain become too heavy, then help me carry it myself. So he's, in a sense, kind of placing himself, or possibly the listener, in the situation of realizing, this is my burden. I should be bearing this burden. But Christ has done it. And even though it should be mine, Christ is helping me to bear my own burden. May he keep helping me. But this recognition of, this is my fault. This is all on my account that this is done. So then they have Christ is hung. He's mocked, even by the two crucified with him. And then he sings out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is the, my God, why have you forsaken me? And this is the one line where that halo disappears.
Whoa.
So he's, up to this point, every line Jesus has sung himself, there's that shimmering of the strings behind him. But when he sings, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's completely alone. There's nothing with him. It's just his voice. The halo is gone. He's completely rejected. And
That's
so
really cool.
Bach's painting this picture with it as he goes through. And then they take him down, and then there's the proclamation, truly this man was the Son of God, and they talk about the rumor that the Pharisees say, he said he would rise again, place guards around his tomb, so they bury him in the cave of Joseph of Arimathea. And then the last lines of the entire St. Matthew's Passion are, we sit down in tears and call to thee in the tomb, rest softly, softly rest. Rest, ye exhausted limbs, your grave and tombstone shall be for the unquieted conscience, be a comfortable pillow and the solaced resting place. In utmost bliss the eyes slumber there. So we're just left, Jesus is dead, all is dark, and we're just left crying in his tomb. And then we'll have to come back on Easter for the rest of it.
Right.
So this is Bach's great meditation on the passion of Christ and his crucifixion and death for us, and his musically painting this picture using the things we talked about in cosmology and harmonia way back. He's using all of this to show us and engage us in the text of what's going on. So I highly recommend listening to it.
Yeah.
Because it's this beautiful marriage of the words and their powerful meaning, but conveying it with music, which, as we said, is a mover of the soul.
Yeah.
So you're getting the words and you're getting the extra. The music it moves.
The
you
music adds
way.
a lot.
Yeah.
It makes it way more powerful, because you could just read it again, because it's just the text from the Bible.
I would recommend you go read it too.
For sure.
Go read your Bible.
But the music definitely adds a whole lot. It makes it way more powerful listening to it. with the music that Bach wrote to go with the words for sure.
And it's just a great way to meditate on what really Christ did for us, that we specifically remember this week leading up to Easter.
Yeah. Yeah, so we definitely recommend listening to that at some point. Optimally, probably, I guess, Good Friday would be a good day to do that on.
Just a couple days away.
It's just a few hours.
Yeah. So if you've got time Good Friday, you can listen to it. Like I said, I recommend the David Wilcox conducted version, but you can find it versions anywhere.
Yeah. I don't know. I would assume the Leonard Bernstein one is different, but that one was also pretty good.
Yeah.
I listened to that one. But that brings us to the end of our time today. We'll have summary up on the blog, per usual. If you have any questions, comments, concerns.
If you have more to offer on this, there's way more than I went over.
Oh, yeah.
Please point out other stuff. This is one of my favorite pieces.
Yeah, definitely. If you just have anything to add, anything you want to let us know about, that's what we have, the comment section, places for you to let us know those things. So, is there anything else
Nope.
that we need to add? All right, awesome. Well, thank you for listening, and until next week, take care.